The old war veteran stood at the edge of the crowd, his eyes scanning the grounds of the historic palace. His worn uniform, though faded with age, still held the pride and strength of the man who had worn it decades ago. He had seen things in his life that most people could never imagine, things that had changed him forever, but he had never lost his respect for the flag he had once fought under, nor the men and women who wore it with honor. Today was special. He had come to witness the changing of the guard at the palace, a tradition that held deep meaning for him. It was a reminder of a time when he too had stood watch, guarding something much bigger than himself. As he stood quietly, his hand instinctively reached up to his chest, where the medals he had earned long ago were pinned. He didn't wear them for show. He wore them to remind himself of the sacrifices that had been made, both by him and by others who had fought beside him. Around him, tourists chattered, and families posed for pictures, unaware of the solemnity of the moment. The young royal guards, fresh in their ceremonial uniforms, stood at attention, their faces stern and their postures perfect. The veteran studied them closely, feeling a sense of pride and admiration. He could see the discipline in their movements, the commitment in their eyes. These young men, standing tall and proud, represented everything he had once fought to protect. As the ceremony continued, he felt a wave of emotion rise within him. The guards' march was precise, their movements synchronized, but for the veteran, it was more than just a performance. It was a tribute to all the soldiers who had come before, and it brought a flood of memories rushing back. He remembered the days when he was just as young, just as determined to serve his country. He remembered the fear, the camaraderie, the sacrifices, and the loss. The sound of the military band playing in the background seemed to echo in his heart, reminding him of the past. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the music wash over him. When he opened them again, he noticed one of the young guards looking at him. The guard's eyes were a little softer than the others, a flicker of something, perhaps curiosity or respect, passing between them. The veteran's heart swelled with pride. The young man might not have known who he was, but that brief connection was enough. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. The world around him faded, and all he could see was the guard's face, young and full of determination. The veteran knew exactly what he was feeling because he had felt it too, many years ago. It was the weight of responsibility, the honor of service, and the pride that came with knowing you were doing something important. The veteran stood a little straighter, his chest swelling with pride. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, the veteran remained in place, his eyes still on the guards. He was lost in thought, remembering his own service and the moments that had defined his life. But just as he was about to turn and leave, he raised his hand. Slowly, with great care, he brought his hand up in a quiet salute to the young guards, acknowledging their commitment to duty. It was a gesture he had made countless times in his life, but today it felt more meaningful than ever before. And as his hand hovered in the air, he silently hoped that the young guard would understand. This was not just a salute to the uniform, but to the man wearing it. The young royal guard stood in line with his fellow soldiers, completing his shift during the changing of the guard ceremony. As the band played and the ceremony unfolded, his mind seemed to wander, distracted by something he couldn't explain. His eyes kept drifting towards the elderly man who had been standing quietly at the back of the crowd. The veteran had caught his attention, not through anything loud or dramatic, but through a simple, silent gesture. The guard had seen many tourists and visitors salute or wave during the ceremony, but this was different. The old man had raised his hand slowly, with an air of respect that was hard to ignore. The moment their eyes met, the guard felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just the veteran's age or his medals that captured his attention. There was something deeper, something about the way the man held himself, the quiet dignity in his stance that spoke volumes. For the briefest moment, the guard's mind flashed back to his training, to all the lessons they had been taught about respect and duty. He had been trained to focus on the ceremony, to maintain his composure and precision at all times. But this moment was different. It was as if time had slowed down, and all he could think about was the silent communication between him and the old man. The veteran had not said a word, yet the guard felt a deep sense of connection. There was no need for words. The gesture of the salute spoke more than anything he could have said. It reminded him of why he had chosen this path, why he had joined the Royal Guard in the first place. It wasn't just for the honor of wearing the uniform, but for the chance to stand on the shoulders of those who had served before him, just as the veteran had. The ceremony finished, and the guard felt the weight of his uniform pressing down on him. The crowd began to disperse, and people started to leave the area, chatting excitedly about the spectacle they had just witnessed. But for the guard, the moment had left an impression that wasn't so easily shaken. As he removed his hat and placed it back in its proper position, he found himself standing still, almost lost in thought. He couldn't help but think about the veteran. Who was he? What had he seen in his life to make him stand so tall despite his years? The young guard walked away from his post and continued with his duties, but the image of the old man lingered in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something important had happened between them, something beyond the ceremony. The salute was small, simple even, but its impact had been profound. The young man began to realize that the veteran had not only honored the tradition of the guard, but had also reminded him of the real meaning of service. As he completed his rounds, the young guard could not stop thinking about the silent exchange. It had awakened something inside him. A deep respect, not just for the uniform he wore, but for the men and women who had worn it before him. And for the first time since he had joined the guard, he felt a new sense of responsibility, not only to the royal family he protected, but also to the legacy of the soldiers who had given everything for their country. The weight of that responsibility suddenly felt heavier, but also more meaningful. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was a moment he would carry with him for the rest of his life. It was more than just a routine ceremony. It had become a turning point. And without even knowing it, the veteran had given him a lesson he would never forget. The young guard couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him after the brief moment he shared with the veteran. As he went about his daily duties, the image of the old man and his slow salute kept resurfacing in his thoughts. Every time he tried to focus on his tasks, his mind would drift back to the veteran standing at the edge of the crowd, watching the ceremony with such deep respect. It was a quiet, almost unnoticeable gesture, yet it had made a profound impact on him. He found himself thinking about the veteran's life. What kind of man he must have been to have earned such respect, not only from others but from himself. The veteran's calm, dignified presence had left a lasting impression on the young guard, and for the first time, he began to see the true meaning behind the ceremonial duties he had been trained to perform. It wasn't just about standing at attention or performing drills. It was about honoring those who had come before him, those who had paved the way for the freedoms and responsibilities he now had. The guard began to question his own sense of duty. He had always believed in the importance of his role, but the encounter with the veteran made him wonder if he was truly living up to the legacy of those who had served before him. Was he just going through the motions, performing his duties out of obligation, or was there a deeper purpose to it all? He felt a sudden surge of determination. He wanted to honor the man who had saluted him, to prove that the respect he had shown wasn't taken for granted. That evening, as he sat alone in his small quarters, the guard reflected on his life. His decision to join the Royal Guard had been influenced by his family, who had a long tradition of serving in the military. His parents were proud of his role, but he had always felt like he was following a path that had already been set for him. He realized, however, that his time in the Guard was about more than just fulfilling a family tradition. It was about carrying on a sense of honor and duty, one that was much older and far more significant than any uniform he wore. The thought of the veteran's silent salute filled him with a new sense of purpose. It was as if the old man had seen something in him, something worth respecting, even if they had never exchanged a single word. It was in that moment of silent understanding that the guard felt a shift inside himself. He knew he had a responsibility, not just to the people he protected, but to the history of those who had served before him. He wasn't just a soldier following orders. He was part of something much larger, a tradition that stretched back for centuries. The next morning, as the guard prepared for his shift, he made a decision. He would not let that moment fade away like so many others had. He would take the time to truly understand the importance of his service and what it meant to honor those who had come before him. He was determined to show respect in ways that went beyond the daily rituals. He wanted to live with purpose, just as the veteran had done, standing tall and proud despite the years that had passed. As he marched to his post that morning, the young guard felt a renewed sense of resolve. He wasn't sure how, but he knew he would find a way to show the same kind of respect the veteran had shown him. It might not be through a salute or a simple gesture. It would come through his actions, his dedication to the duty he had chosen. He walked with a new confidence, knowing that, just like the veteran, his role was not just about the uniform, but about the legacy he was now a part of. The young guard could hardly concentrate on his duties as the days passed. The encounter with the veteran had planted a seed deep in his heart, and it was growing stronger with each passing moment. The more he thought about it, the more determined he became. He had decided that he couldn't just let this feeling fade into the background like a fleeting memory. Something inside him had shifted, and he knew he had to act on it. One evening, after his shift had ended and the palace grounds had quieted down, the guard stood by the gates, staring at the empty courtyard. The breeze brushed against his face, and the sky was painted in hues of orange and purple as the sun set behind the palace walls. He couldn't help but think about the silent exchange between him and the veteran. The old man's salute had meant so much, yet it had been so simple. The more the guard thought about it, the more he realized that respect wasn't just about following orders or completing a task. It was about acknowledging the humanity of others, regardless of their rank or position. In that quiet moment, he decided he would do something he hadn't planned before. He would seek out the veteran, the man who had shown him a side of service he had never truly understood until now. He wasn't sure how he would find him, but he knew that this gesture, this chance to show his gratitude, would mean something. It wasn't just about thanking the veteran for his service. It was about honoring what he represented. He had shown the guard that respect could be given quietly, without the need for grand gestures or public recognition. It was something much deeper, something that came from the heart. The next day, the guard made a point to speak with his superior. He explained the deep respect he felt for the veteran and shared his decision to track him down and show his appreciation. The senior officer listened intently, nodding slowly. He had seen the change in the young man's demeanor over the past few days. The officer knew that the guard's actions were coming from a place of sincerity and commitment to his duty, not just a simple gesture of gratitude. With his superior's blessing, the young guard took to the streets after his shift, asking around if anyone had seen the elderly war veteran. He wasn't sure where to begin, but he felt a strong sense of purpose that kept him moving forward. He asked a few locals, and eventually, someone directed him to a small cafe on the edge of town, where the veteran was known to stop by every morning for coffee. The guard's heart raced a little as he walked through the door of the cafe, the familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. The elderly man was sitting at a corner table, a steaming cup in front of him. He was deep in thought, staring out the window. The guard hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach. But as soon as the veteran looked up and caught his eye, the guard felt that same connection they had shared during the ceremony. The veteran's face softened, and a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. The guard walked over to the table, and without a word, stood at attention in front of the man. He raised his hand slowly, just as he had done during the ceremony. But this time, it wasn't just a salute. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, a way to say, "I see you. I understand now." The veteran looked up at him, and for a moment, there was a silence that spoke louder than any words could. Then, to the guard's surprise, the old man slowly stood up and returned the salute. The guard felt a lump form in his throat. He had expected this to be a simple moment, a quiet exchange, but what he didn't expect was the overwhelming feeling of connection that washed over him. In that brief exchange, the young man realized that service was not just about duty. It was about recognizing the sacrifices of those who had come before, honoring them in any way possible, even if it was just through a shared gesture of respect. The veteran placed his coffee cup down and gestured for the guard to sit. They didn't speak much, but in that moment, words weren't necessary. The bond had been formed through the respect they had for each other, a bond that would last far longer than the simple salute they had shared. The guard left the cafe that day with a new understanding of his purpose, knowing that this gesture, this moment, would stay with him forever. The young guard walked away from the cafe with his heart full. The veteran's simple yet profound gesture had left him with a feeling he couldn't quite describe. It was as if the weight of his duty had shifted in a way that felt more real, more meaningful. The salute they had shared wasn't just a ceremonial action. It had become a bond, one that transcended the boundaries of rank and time. As he walked through the quiet streets, the guard's thoughts began to swirl. The veteran had stood for so many things: the sacrifices made, the battles fought, the memories carried over the years. Yet despite everything the man had lived through, he had stood before him, a stranger, and shown respect in the most genuine way possible. The guard realized that the veteran had reminded him of the importance of honoring not just the uniform, but the person beneath it. It was a lesson that ran deeper than any drill or training he had received. When the guard returned to the palace the next day, his steps felt different. There was a new sense of purpose in the way he carried himself. His fellow soldiers noticed the change too. The guard was still as disciplined and focused as before, but there was something new in the way he interacted with those around him. His attention to detail, his respect for his comrades, and his reverence for the uniform he wore had all been elevated. The young guard now saw his duties through a new lens. It wasn't just about following the orders or going through the motions. It was about honoring the history that came before him, about standing tall in the face of duty, not because he had to, but because he truly believed in what he was doing. The veteran's influence had made him realize that every action, no matter how small, could be a form of respect. Even something as simple as a salute could carry immense meaning if it was done with sincerity. During the next changing of the guard ceremony, as the young soldier stood at attention, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The music played, the guards marched, and the ceremony unfolded as it always did. But this time, he saw it all with new eyes. He wasn't just a soldier carrying out a ritual. He was part of a tradition that spanned generations. He was standing on the shoulders of those who had given everything for their country, and in that moment, he understood the weight of that responsibility. The veteran's influence didn't stop there. Over the next few days, the young guard found himself thinking more and more about the lessons he could learn from those who had come before him. The more he reflected, the more he realized that respect was not something that could be taught. It had to be earned through actions, through the way one lived their life. The respect he had shown to the veteran had come from a place of deep understanding, and now he wanted to live with that same level of honor. By the time the next ceremony rolled around, the young guard's resolve was stronger than ever. As he stood at attention, he remembered the veteran, the man who had shown him what true respect looked like. The guard couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, knowing that he was carrying on a legacy that had been passed down through the years. His uniform, once a symbol of duty, now felt like a reminder of the promise he had made to himself, to always honor the past and live up to the example set by those who had served before him. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, the young guard stood a little taller, his chest swelling with a quiet pride. He had found something that went beyond the uniform, beyond the salutes. He had found a sense of purpose and a deep respect for the history and tradition he was now a part of. And in his heart, he knew that this was just the beginning of a journey that would shape him for the rest of his life. The young guard felt a change in the air as he continued his duties at the palace. Every day, as he stood at his post, He couldn't help but reflect on the encounter with the veteran and the impact it had left on him. It wasn't just a moment in time. It had become a turning point in his life. He had begun to understand that being a soldier wasn't only about following orders or performing rituals. It was about something much deeper. It was about carrying the weight of tradition, honoring those who had come before, and living with integrity in every action, no matter how small. The ceremony continued as it always had, with the guards standing at attention, the band playing, and the tourists admiring the perfect display of discipline. But for the young guard, each moment felt more meaningful than before. He now saw the significance of every move, every step, and every salute. He noticed how his fellow soldiers carried themselves with pride, how they looked out for one another, and how they took their roles seriously. It wasn't just about looking sharp in their uniforms. It was about representing something greater, something that connected them all to a long history of service. As he stood with the other guards, the young man began to feel the weight of what it truly meant to be part of the Royal Guard. It wasn't about the ceremonies, the uniforms, or the tradition alone. It was about the responsibility they carried to honor those who had given their lives in service to their country. He thought back to the veteran, the old man who had shared nothing more than a quiet salute, yet had left a mark that would last forever. That salute had been a reminder of what true respect looked like, and the young guard now carried that lesson with him every day. The respect he had for his fellow soldiers grew, and he found himself paying closer attention to the small details of their work. He saw the care they took in keeping their uniforms pristine, the way they stood tall during their shifts, and the respect they showed to each other. The bonds between the guards had always been strong, but now, the young man understood them in a way he hadn't before. He had always been part of this family, but now he felt an even deeper connection to it. One day, as he was walking through the palace courtyard, he overheard some tourists talking about the ceremony and the impressive display of discipline. A few of them mentioned how they admired the soldiers' commitment and how it reminded them of the importance of honor and duty. It struck him then, this wasn't just about what they were doing in the moment. It was about what their actions meant to others. The visitors who were just passing through were witnessing something bigger than the ceremony itself. They were seeing a symbol of something timeless, something that had lasted through generations and would continue to inspire for years to come. The young guard realized that, in many ways, they weren't just performing a ritual for themselves. They were performing it for the people who would never truly understand the weight of what they were doing, but who would still be touched by the display of honor. He could see how their actions carried a message of strength, resilience, and respect. The guard began to feel proud not just of himself, but of his role in this larger picture. He wasn't just serving in the Royal Guard. He was carrying on a legacy, and he had a responsibility to make sure that legacy was preserved. Every day, as he completed his duties, the guard felt more connected to the veteran who had shown him what it meant to live with respect. He was determined to honor that legacy, not just through his actions in uniform, but through the way he lived his life every day. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that being part of the Royal Guard was a privilege, a chance to be part of something much bigger than himself, to stand tall not just for the monarchy, but for the principles that had stood the test of time. The young guard's heart swelled with pride as he stood once more in the courtyard, watching the ceremony unfold. It wasn't just a routine anymore. It was a reminder of the honor that came with the uniform, the responsibility that came with serving, and the deep respect that should always be at the heart of every action. He stood taller now, not just because of the uniform, but because he had finally understood what it truly meant to serve with dignity and honor. And he knew that, with every salute and every step, he was carrying the lessons of the past forward into the future. The young guard woke up early the next morning with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in a long time. The day before had been another reminder of how much he had changed since meeting the veteran. His thoughts were still on the simple salute, but now, it was more than just a memory. It had become a part of him, something he carried with him in every moment of his service. As he prepared for the day ahead, The weight of his uniform felt different. It wasn't just the fabric or the tradition it represented. It was the responsibility, the honor, and the respect he now understood. The young guard no longer saw the uniform as just a part of his job. It was a symbol of something far bigger. He had come to realize that being a royal guard wasn't just about standing still or following orders. It was about embodying the values that had been passed down through generations. During the changing of the guard ceremony that morning, the young guard stood taller, his posture more confident. As he moved through his duties, he could feel the difference within himself. Every action was done with intention and purpose. He no longer thought of the ceremony as just a routine. Now it felt like a way to honor those who had come before him, like the veteran who had reminded him of the real meaning behind his role. His fellow soldiers noticed the change too. The young guard was no longer just going through the motions. His dedication was clear in the way he carried himself, the way he interacted with others, and the respect he showed to his comrades. It was as if something had shifted inside him. And now he was more determined than ever to honor the legacy of those who had served before him. He no longer saw himself as just a soldier in a uniform. He saw himself as part of a much larger tradition, one that carried with it a deep responsibility to preserve the values of honor, respect, and duty. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, the young guard couldn't help but think of the veteran. He thought about how the old man had stood there, saluting without words, showing respect in the quietest of ways. He remembered the veteran's eyes, how they had spoken volumes, telling him more than any speech could. That moment, though brief, had been a turning point, one that had changed how he viewed his service and his role as a royal guard. The young man walked across the palace grounds, his thoughts filled with gratitude. He realized that it wasn't just the salute that had meant so much. It was the connection, the understanding that passed between them without a single word being spoken. It was the recognition of shared duty, of mutual respect. In that brief moment, the veteran had shown him the true meaning of service. And now, he was determined to carry that lesson forward, not just in his duties as a guard, but in his everyday life. The young guard had never felt more proud of his role. He knew that being a royal guard came with its challenges, but it also came with a deeper purpose. He wasn't just standing watch over a palace. He was standing watch over a legacy, a tradition that had been passed down through countless generations. And now, he understood that it wasn't about the uniform or the ceremony. It was about the people who had served before him and the respect he owed to them. As the sun set that evening, the young guard sat alone in his quarters, reflecting on the day. He thought about the veteran again, about the simple salute that had changed his life. The young man had come to realize that, in the end, it wasn't the grand gestures or the ceremonies that mattered. It was the quiet moments of respect and understanding, the ones that spoke directly to the heart. He felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that he was now living with a purpose greater than himself. The respect the veteran had shown him would stay with him forever, and in turn, he would continue to honor it with every step he took in his service. Tomorrow would be another day of duty, but for the young guard, it would be another chance to live out the values that had been instilled in him. With each day, he grew stronger, not just in body, but in spirit, and with each passing ceremony, he became more determined to honor the past, respect the present, and pave the way for the future. The young guard stood in the courtyard early the next morning, watching the sun rise over the palace grounds. The colors of the sky were soft, the warm golden light touching everything it met. It was a quiet moment, one he cherished, because it gave him time to reflect on everything that had changed since his encounter with the veteran. He thought about how much more he had come to understand about his role as a guard, and about the responsibility that came with the uniform he wore. As the day began, the guard could feel a new sense of purpose in everything he did. He had always understood that being a royal guard came with responsibility, but now it felt different. It wasn't just about standing tall or marching with precision. It was about the deeper meaning behind it all. He was no longer performing a duty just for the sake of tradition. Now he felt an emotional connection to the service, to the legacy of those who had come before him. Each ceremony, each guard change, now felt more significant. The movements were the same, sharp, practiced, and coordinated, but in his mind, the meaning had shifted. He wasn't just participating in a ritual. He was part of something much larger, a tradition that was carried through time by men and women who had made sacrifices long before he had even joined the guard. The young guard knew now that his job wasn't just to stand in front of the palace. It was to honor the past, the veterans, the people who had built the foundation of the life he was now living. The connection with the veterans still weighed heavily on his mind. He remembered the elderly man's eyes, the way they had looked at him with respect, with understanding. That silent salute had shown him something he had never truly grasped before. The veteran had reminded him that respect wasn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes the deepest gestures were the quietest, the ones that came from a place of true understanding. After the morning ceremony, the young guard took a moment to walk around the palace grounds, his footsteps soft on the grass. As he walked, he thought about the way he had approached his service before. It had been more mechanical, following orders without questioning, without really thinking about what they meant. Now he had a new perspective. He understood that every action, no matter how small, was a reflection of the respect he held for those who had come before him. The veteran had shown him how to do that, not just with grand gestures, but with the quiet strength of living a life of integrity. His thoughts wandered back to the veterans he had met before, the older soldiers who had shared their stories with him. He realized now that he had never truly listened to their words, never truly understood the weight of their experiences. But now, after the veteran's salute, he knew he had to change that. He wanted to listen. He wanted to understand. He wanted to honor their stories and carry them forward, not just as part of the ceremony, but as part of who he was becoming. As the day went on, the young guard continued his duties with a renewed sense of commitment. His comrades noticed the change in him too. There was a different kind of focus in his movements, a deeper attention to the meaning behind everything they did. He had always been a good soldier, but now he was beginning to embody the values that the royal guard had been built on. That evening, after the ceremony ended and the palace grounds began to quiet down, the young guard stood once again in the courtyard, looking at the stars beginning to appear in the sky. He felt a sense of peace settle over him. The salute, the encounter with the veteran, it had all led him to this moment of clarity. He knew now that his duty as a guard wasn't just about standing at attention. It was about serving with honor, with respect, and with an understanding of the history he was now a part of. He had found something deeper within himself, a purpose that went beyond the uniform. It wasn't just about doing his job. It was about doing it in a way that honored the past and would inspire those who came after him. The veteran's lesson had changed his life, and in return, he would carry it forward, with every salute and every step he took. As the night settled around him, the young guard stood tall, feeling ready to face whatever came next, knowing that he was part of something much bigger than himself.